Chapter 31. Wednesday late afternoon. Back home, the animals tumbled out of the vehicle and walked proudly up to the front door. "I don't know why you're so pleased with yourselves," Doreen scolded. "Mac is mad at us again." Not that she would focus on that. Because of course another major case was breaking, and the good news was Crystal was alive. But she frowned as she thought about that. What about the second footprint? Then it hit her. She pulled out her phone and called Mac. "I don't have time to talk to you right now," he growled. "Maybe not, but you need to hear what I have to say," she said urgently. "What's the matter?" he asked, his voice sharpening. She replied, "I agree that Jose probably took Crystal to help her. But I think they also picked out a second girl who was in trouble, and when they went there the first time, they couldn't get her because they were interrupted. Or maybe she was too sick to travel. They had grabbed her toys first, throwing them out the window, but then when they couldn't get her, they took off. So only her toys went missing." He sucked in his breath. "Right. You're thinking about the case from a few days ago. I suggest you make sure that little girl is not being abused," she said, "because that seems to be why these brothers are doing this. Also, we need to find out if they've taken any others. I get that Crystal was probably the first, but that does not mean she was the last." She hung up and turned around, desperately in need of that cup of comforting tea, but her mind was just buzzing. To the animals, she tried to explain. Probably because of the kind of work they did, or maybe from casing houses for break-ins, they're finding children in tough situations. She doubted Mac had considered something like that. Who would? It wasn't a normal problem, or a normal thought process. A ladder would have given them that weird footprint. And as she thought about it, she wondered about the brothers. Jose ran pretty well, but what about Guido? Where was he? The questions raced through her mind as she walked into the kitchen, sat down, and wrote the loose threads on her notepad. When they find Crystal, how many other young girls would they find? Does Jose have any at the house with him? Where's Guido? And the next one she added was, what was Mary's role in this? She sat back as the tea kettle boiled and said, "I don't get Mary's part." Muggs woofed. And then he woofed again, and then he woofed again. Doreen looked at him in surprise. He was at the back door. She opened the door and let him out. "Not sure what you're in a rush for," she stated, but he headed down the steps at top speed. She propped open the kitchen door, letting Goliath outside too. Thaddeus waddled out, and at the top step, he flew down to the garden bed. And just then, Doreen saw a woman standing half-hidden along the corner of the house. Muggs raced toward her, Doreen silently running after Muggs. The woman glared at him and said, "You filthy thing, get away from me." Doreen looked up, recognized her features, and nodded. "Hello, Mary." Mary glared at her. "I guess you aren't out of town, are you?" Doreen asked. Mary just shrugged. "Eric is. So I usually leave too." "Sure, otherwise you'd have to take care of the place, wouldn't you?" Mary tilted her head up. "You don't know anything about me," she snapped. "I know you don't like children or pets," Doreen said. "How many other kids have you abused?" Mary stared at her in surprise. "None, I just don't want any around me." "That doesn't make me an abuser." "And yet, your brother saw you hit Crystal." "I only hit her a couple times," she said. "I think an awful lot of my father is in me. Which is one of the reasons why I don't want children around. I don't want to face that." "That's probably good," Doreen said. "Better to acknowledge your weaknesses." She wondered why Mary was here. "So do you find these kids for them?" Mary looked at her, and just a hint of fear was in her gaze. Doreen thought about it and said, "That's what they do, isn't it? Find children in trouble so they can rescue them." "They're idiots," Mary said. "They have one success, so it goes to their heads." "Ah, so you did know." How many times have they tried since? They don't kidnap anybody if they don't have to, she said. Sometimes they just remove the abuser. Or they help the parent being abused and their children to escape. I think over the last 10 years they've probably helped about one a year, she said, but they certainly haven't taken all the kids away. The last 2 came out of Vernon. Both women were being beaten and the children were just starting to be beaten. My brothers paid for the women to move back east with their families, she said proudly. There's nothing criminal or wrong about that. No, not at all, Doreen said. Except that Crystal was only 8 at the time, so I'm sure the courts will make them pay for it anyway. Maybe, Mary said, and if they'd left it at that, they would have been fine. But of course they didn't. Meaning? There's a couple kids around town, she said, in very bad scenarios, and my brothers have been casing those places wondering what to do. You mean, how to steal the children or how to help the family? Both. That's not something you can just walk up on and change in an instant, she said with a dismissive wave of her hand. She glanced at Doreen and said, How did you figure it out? Doreen was stumped. I'm not exactly sure, she said. It just occurred to me that, if her home life wasn't all that good, maybe Crystal wanted to leave. Her home life was terrible, Mary said. I tried to get Eric to stop hitting Crystal, but he wasn't interested. And of course, Clara was one of the worst. I knew I couldn't be around her because I'd be just as bad, she admitted. I never hurt Casey unless Dad was around hurting Casey, and then I needed to be his favorite, so I would jump in and beat her too. And I'd do the same with Eric. Much better for me and Eric, if Eric doesn't have children. How hard it must have been for Crystal that she had 3 abusive parents, that she lost her family because you guys couldn't control your own abusive natures, Doreen murmured. She's much better off without us, obviously, Mary said. She sauntered forward. Doreen stepped back ever so slightly. She wasn't sure what Mary was doing here, but Doreen highly doubted it was to have a cup of tea. But who knew? What can I do for you? Doreen asked. You obviously came for a reason. To see you, of course, Mary said. I don't want my brothers to go to jail. I'm not sure that's an option, Doreen said honestly, and there certainly isn't anything I can do to change the outcome at this point. Are you sure? Mary asked. You're the one who caused all this trouble, so if you went up to the judge and told him that you lied or that you were misguided in your suspicions, then they would be released. I don't think so, Doreen said. One of your brothers just tried to run a police officer off the road. Mary paled and pinched her lips together. They just need to get back to Mexico. They'll stay away. I tried to get them to stay away before, but they wouldn't. You were afraid they'd come back and put your cushy life in danger, weren't you? Doreen said shrewdly. You don't care about them as much as you're worried about how it will affect you and your nice little life. Eric will go to jail, Mary said. And likely so will you, Doreen said. Eric's business is highly suspicious. His abusiveness toward his daughter is also suspicious, and he used to blackmail your brothers, so that's another criminal act. But of course if they pay for kidnapping Crystal, Doreen said, then you'll get caught up in the same web when they tell the cops about your role in all of this, right? You don't know anything, Mary cried out. I know you were blackmailing your own brothers too, Doreen added with a hard smile. It's all about the money for you, isn't it? Mary's fists clenched. Muggs, who had been walking around in a wide circle, had gone toward the fence and was sitting right behind Mary. Doreen eyed the basset hound. She wasn't sure what he was up to, but something here he didn't like. Goliath, on the other hand, had just walked straight up to Mary. He sat there, staring up, as if she were a super tall tree he wanted to climb. And that wouldn't go well for anybody. Just then Doreen's phone rang. She pulled it out and Mary said, "Don't answer that." It was Mac. She hit talk anyway and held it behind her back. That's not smart. If I don't answer the phone, people will come looking for me. They won't find you, Mary said. You realize why, right? Why? Because your nice, steady little world will rock if I let the cops find out what your brothers did. It's not even so much that, she said. Of course not, Doreen said. It's all about them not finding out what you've done. Mary just glared at her. You don't know anything. Maybe not, Doreen said cheerfully. But you can bet other people will figure it out. No, they won't. If you're not here, nobody will know anything, she said. Doreen raised both hands as if frustrated. Seriously, why does everybody think if they can just make me disappear, that all their problems will disappear too? The police are already involved. So let's not be stupid here. I have no intention of being stupid, Mary said. But I can't have my life destroyed. I'm not going back to Mexico. Back to Mexico? Doreen stared at her in surprise. Oh my, you're not a Canadian, are you? Mary shook her head. No, I can't seem to get the paperwork approved. My brothers are both Canadian, but I'm not, she said, and I won't be sent back to Mexico. There's no reason to be deported, Doreen said, if you've never done anything wrong. I think they only do that to convicted criminals, and only after they've served their time. Of course, she didn't really know that. She'd never had any experience with criminals. At least not until she came to this absolutely lovely little community Nan had convinced her to now live in, where the den of thieves lived. I am delighted to hear Crystal is alive and well, though. But of course she wants to come home, Mary said. And I can't have that either. At that, Doreen stiffened. Make sure you haven't done anything to hurt that little girl, Doreen warned. None of us will stand for that. Mary snorted. She likes it there. She really is having fun and thoroughly enjoying herself. She's a straight-A student and wants to come here to study to become a veterinarian, she said, as if that was such a foreign concept. Yeah, she wants to work and make her way in life and be a success on her own, Doreen said. I think I'd really like her. What do you know? My boutique store is work, Mary said. You're nothing but a rich man's discard. Ouch, Doreen said in outrage. I resent that. I don't care if you resent it or not, Mary said. She looked around and said, It's really quiet here, isn't it? Not so quiet that you can shoot somebody and get away with it, Doreen said. Mary's gaze slid toward her. Doreen nodded. You think I don't know why you've got your hand in your purse? Why are you just standing there, as if that's a normal position? And yet you're not bothered, Mary said, puzzled. I don't understand. Well, you see, even if you do kill me, Doreen said, I know Mac will make sure you suffer the maximum penalty of the law. Oh, your sweetheart police officer. Ha. I don't think he'll care for very long anyway. The fact that Guido tried to run him off the road and failed doesn't mean he won't try to run him off the road a second time, and not fail. Maybe, but I'm not sure it was Guido. I thought it was Jose, but now I think it was probably you, Doreen said as she thought about it. Jose was at Rosemore, but that's only a couple minutes walk from here. You could easily have driven there, hopped into his truck and then gone after Mac. Mary shifted uneasily. Doreen stared at her and then said, Or you were already there talking with your brother. Mary continued to just glare at her. Doreen shrugged. It doesn't matter. Mac will figure it out. Slowly Mary pulled out the revolver and said, It won't matter because it'll be too late. I'm not going back to Mexico. Just then, Goliath, seeing her gun hand slowly rise, reached up onto his back legs with his claws extended, jumped up, grabbed Mary's gun arm on either side and hung on, digging his claws into her forearm. She screamed and shook him off. Goliath went up into the air, his claws ripping through her flesh before dropping to the ground, but he took the revolver with him. Mary screamed out loud and held her arm as blood seeped through her fingers. But the gun was loose. Doreen reached out to kick the gun away. Mary went to grab it only to have Muggs jump behind her knees and send her flying forward until her face planted in the grass. And if that wasn't enough of an indignity, Thaddeus now walked up and down her back, pecking at her. "Get them off me." "No, I don't think so," Doreen said. "They fight pretty dirty, and I think they like their new spot to wipe their muddy feet and to peck germs all over." Mary screamed again and tried to roll over, but Muggs was walking half on her back and half on the ground. Every time she moved, Goliath reached out and swiped at her. Doreen had the gun off to the side safely. She crouched in front of Mary and said, "This really isn't a good day for you." She could hear vehicles out in the front yard. She heard Mac yelling, "Doreen? Out back," she hollered. Mary tried to get up on her hands and knees, but Goliath swatted her on the side of the face, his claws out, and she dropped down, crying out. Mac came around the corner and stopped. Doreen stood and shrugged. "She wanted to kill me," she said by way of explanation, pointing at the handgun. "The animals didn't like that." He stared at both women and laughed. "Look at that, Mary. You've been bested by some of the things you hate the most," he said, and continued to laugh. "Those animals have saved my bacon so many times," Doreen said with a smile. "Obviously they're my family, and we'd do anything for family." She glanced down at Mary and said, "Right, Mary?" But Mary was too busy sobbing into the grass to answer. That was all right. Doreen already knew the answer. It might have taken her a while to figure it out, but she knew it now.